Ladies and gents, welcome back. In recent times, Canada has been pushing towards removing assets from political dissidents. We've seen it recently with the Freedom Convoy last year in February, almost 1 year to the day now. And we're now seeing the government making moves to confiscate assets from people labeled sanctioned individuals. And this is coming on the heels of a conflict in Europe with Russia and Ukraine, of which we are not actually involved with. But I wanted to get an opinion on this on a legal basis. So today I decided to bring in Wes Mussio. Wes, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I wanted to ask you about what is the legal basis around this? We have this, I forget his name, it's the Russian guy, oligarch, and there's about 1,000 other individuals that they're sanctioning and saying that they want to remove their assets, basically take their property, sell it off or liquidate it however they want, and then do with it as they wish. What's the legal basis behind this? Do we not have property rights in the country?
Well, it's very scary, I could say, because you can quickly see how it can be abused by some government officials. Some obviously are good. A lot of government officials are not so good. And so what they did was the federal Liberals put in a act called the Special Economic Measures Act, and then they did a regulation which they can do order in council. In other words, they don't have to go through the legislative assembly, and they just put in the regulation. It's called the Special Economic Measures Russia regulations. So what that did was they got a big long list of 1,000 oligarchs or people that they think are supporting Putin, put them on a list, and if they can find assets in Canada, which these oligarchs have, they can seize them and then eventually go to court and actually have the money paid to the crown. And then they say they're going to give it to Ukraine as a good Samaritan. And that is a very, very dangerous precedent because it takes away your fundamental rights for property and assets. In other words, if you become a political dissident, the government can put you on a list and basically come over and take your house and all your bank accounts if they want, assuming they think your political views aren't the ones they like.
So that's particularly terrifying. I mean, we saw this during the Freedom Convoy. They froze people's assets, but we're actually talking about taking people's assets permanently, like removing them from their possession and then allocating them some other way that they see fit. Now, what sort of due process is there in this thing? Is there, I mean, for everything we're supposed to be able to see our day in court. If they make a mistake, can it be rectified? Once like a company's liquidated, like what can you do there? You're done. It's over.
Well, basically, some of the legislation, just to show you how draconian it is if a peace officer has reasonable grounds to believe that a Canadian citizen is dealing with a person with economic sanctions, they can just show up at your house with no warrant, just walk in. So that's sort of contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedom, obviously. And then if they feel that you're helping out a person on that list, you can have, a conviction of up to 5 years in prison. So it's a pretty stiff legislation. The one proviso is that the government has to, or they can seize your assets, but in order to actually take them and consume them and send them off to where they think they should go, they have to go to the court and get it supported by a judge. So, I mean, I'll knock on wood that the judge is looking at this and say, this is not right. Because, you got to think about it. Even this fellow Roman Arbitchov, I think it is,
the Russian oligarch guy that they're going after.
Yeah, lost $26 million in assets.
And I have to preface this. We don't care about him. Like I don't care anything about him. There's nothing. What I care about is property rights. That guy could go pound sand for all I care. But property rights in Canada for not just Canadian citizens, but investors that want to come to Canada and invest in businesses here.
And that's the point, whether or not this guy's a bad apple or did some terrible things or whatever, we don't know. But what the government has done is put in whether they believe that someone has breached international peace or security, has violated human rights, or has committed acts of corruption in the world. So they're the judge, jury, and executioner. And then if they decide that that person is so fitted, they can go in, seize the assets, go to court, and basically take the assets away from any individual. So you can imagine, this legislation to be used against even people local in Canada. If you're part of the Conservative Party and they don't like you, they can go after Pierre Poilievre for all we know. Because they can justify it based on human rights or commitment of corruption or whatever they want to say. So it really creates some significant concerns. And the one point that
Sorry for the interruption. There was an audio issue, so we're gonna continue.
Okay, so one of the Justice Minister David Lametti, federal Liberal, commented, "You don't have an absolute right to your own property in Canada." I mean, that's their view from the federal government, and that's a scary view because in order to get people to invest in Canada from abroad, or for that matter, for Canadians to put their money in Canadian institutions and property, you want to have certainty that it's yours because you've taken money that you earned or you borrowed money. And who in their right mind, if you knew that the government can come and randomly take your assets, like who would want to invest in Canada? That's the question. So it's going to really undermine, the security of Canada as an investment location in the world.
So it was interesting during the inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. Actually, Chrystia Freeland commented that she had heard from a U.S. investor that they would never consider investing in Canada because it's like a banana republic. And then she had almost choking up. She had an emotional moment on that. And then she went and said, so this is why we went with the economic measures. And it's almost backwards to the logic that you would want to go forward with someone who's saying something like this, an investor saying, I wouldn't deal with Canada. It's a banana republic. And what you would want to ensure to investors abroad is that, no, we have a rule of law. We've got due process. If the government thinks that you've done something wrong, you'll have your day in court before you have any chance of your forfeiting assets.
Yeah, and just to pick up that point, when they put in that Emergency Act, there was a run on the bank. Several large banks had to go offline, and because they were worried about money being taken out. Because just like in 1928, leading up to the Great Depression, that's what happened. There was a run on the bank, and then the monetary system collapsed, and that was happening in Canada because, I mean, the average foreigner that's got money and listening to this in Canada isn't thinking Canada is a safe investment. So, personally, I can tell you, I never donated $1 to the Freedom Convoy, but my brother, who has the same last name, and we own a business or a couple businesses together, we got our assets seized for a week. Like our bank accounts, we couldn't function at all, even though I didn't donate $1, but evidently he must have got on a list. And so, that gave me pause. And so I moved a lot of my money down to the US, or my investments are moving there because I don't see the same thing happening in the US. On that point, this legislation that the Canadian government put in, no one else has dared to do it. It's out of the G7 countries, we're the only ones. And that's how crazy it is, because even the US hasn't gone this far. Canada has, and so they're carrying the torch, and we hardly have the power to fight Russia if we ever had to, and surely we're not at war with Russia. So,
well, that's the thing that people need to understand about this whole situation is we're not currently at war with Russia. Russia is not. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is something that the politicians in our country want to support. There are a number of Canadians that want to support the issue, and people can have their opinions on it, whether they're for or against. Who cares, right? That's their prerogative. But we're not currently. We don't have any obligations to this, and yet the government's practicing it as if we do.
Yeah, and you can see that, and I hate to say this about politicians generally, all stripes, they just, a lot of times they don't read these things through, and this is a perfect example. So you're the only G7 country that goes after one of the oligarchs who I'm sure is very powerful in Russia, who's not going to be very excited about it. And one thing leads to another, and we get retaliation on Canada. Why would you go about and do that? It makes no sense. So I'm hopeful that, if the courts ever have to look at this legislation, they're going to actually pull out the Charter of Rights and Freedom and realize that this is a complete contravention of that. Like when you can show up to somebody's house without a search warrant and come in and take stuff from a Canadian, that's just insane. That's like a banana republic, as you said.
Is there a saving grace in this whole scenario? Like, is there a case where it could be brought to court and then the court denies the government the ability to use these tools?
I've been a little bit pessimistic because I've seen a great erosion of the Charter of Rights and Freedom over the last few years under COVID and all the lockdown, and the courts have upheld them with on facts that have been proven to be false in terms of the efficacy of vaccines, etc. So I'm not really optimistic that we're going to see a strong judiciary, but I'm hopeful things do turn, and hopefully at one point the judiciary starts to come down on the government and prevents these sort of ridiculous pieces of legislation that clearly infringe every right that's we've known since Confederation.
Yeah, my fear is that people fall for the I guess without a better term, propaganda behind it. If you pick the worst individual and then that nobody wants to support, and then they base a new law based on that, that's the door that opens, and that's the Pandora's box that we don't want to open here.
Yeah, and in British Columbia, you might have seen some attempt by David Eby coming in. He's going to allegedly, well, he is putting in an unexpected wealth order act, which means that the government simply goes to an individual and says, how did you get that house? We now own it, unless you can prove that you got that through legitimate money. Well, I mean, it reverses the onus. It creates uncertainty in property rights and so forth. But the problem is you get one government, like the federal government, doing this legislation, then you get provincial governments that are, have similar, views left of center, that don't necessarily believe in, fundamental rights and property rights and so forth, and it just a snowball effect. So pretty soon you have legislation across Canada that allows governments to, on the whim of whoever's in power, to seize assets and just take your property. And that sounds to me like something you'd expect in a communist country and not in Canada. But unfortunately, we're going that direction.
Yeah, well, I've always said that property ownership is basically the crux of our society, and this is what holds the whole idea of a market economy you can't have without property ownership and property rights and all of these things. This is definitely fundamental to our way of life, and with that being removed, that changes things drastically.
And especially when you have the justice minister, bragging that we don't have absolute right in our own private property. I mean, that first time I've ever heard that. I always thought we did.
Yeah, the attorney for the government. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if that's the view of the federal government, that's a scary view. And I just hope that the court system, judges wake up and realize that this is a bigger issue. I mean, it's easy, like you said, to go after one particular Russian oligarch, and say that he supported Putin and Putin's doing a bad job and doing terrible things, and everyone's going to agree to that, and then allow it to go in. But then the problem is you get, it just opens Pandora's box, because once the government gets the one piece of legislation through, and they're going to use it and increase the use of it as we see in most governments. And that's one of the things that, from them getting away with the Emergency Act, this is just another example where they got excited about being able to seize assets and put in this legislation. And so it's an example of how they've taken one point that everyone says, oh, it's not like that. But yeah, they suddenly are going and making it deeper. So where is it 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Is it going after, the people that don't vote for the federal Liberals in 5 years? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't
Hopefully
know.
it doesn't. That's the way we're going.
Yeah, that's insane, but it doesn't sound like it hasn't been done somewhere else in the world already. Wes, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I probably will pull you back in once we get more information about these unknown wealth orders that are happening in British Columbia. Perhaps we can have a conversation about that again another time. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, just hope that David Eby realizes that's a terrible idea and doesn't go ahead, but I doubt that.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you guys for joining in and, well, being part of these conversations. These are really tough situations that we're running into here in Canada. It seems like everything's, it was a little bit at a time, and then all at once. We're getting all of it in a big rush. It feels very similar to like a Chavez Venezuela takeover at the moment. Anyway, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think of this situation, and we'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.